Am I audible and visible?
Yes, ma'am.
So, good afternoon to one and all. I am Debalina Das. I'm the head of the Department of English from Panchla Mahavidyalaya. And welcome to this paper presentation segment. And I must say, I have gone through all of your abstracts, and they seem incredibly rich and nuanced. And they seem to be wonderful takes on the concept note of othering and violence. And I cannot wait to go through them to look at your presentations. As mentioned earlier, please keep your presentations to 10 minutes, and we will try to do a question and answer session at the end of all of the paper presentations. So we start with Faraz Subla. They have requested priority because they seem to be having a family emergency. Faraz, are you there? Okay, they're not present. So we start with Shomalu Ghosh. Sir, I can see you're there. You have to unmute yourself, sir. Okay.
Yes, sir. Good, good evening. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Uh, Good evening, ma'am.
Yes, sir. You may
Yes, ma'am.
start
I
with
have
your.
unmuted, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir. Ma'am, now I am audible.
Yes, sir. You're audible and visible, sir.
Now I am audible.
Yes, sir. You are audible and visible, but you seem to be breaking up. If there is a network issue, we can have you. We can have you at the
Okay.
end of the session if there's a network issue, sir.
Just okay.
Sir, we are running short on time, so you have to start, sir. So if there's an issue with your presentation, can we can have you at the last, and we can move on to the second person, sir. Okay.
Okay.
So moving on to the second person, Prabhat Ranjan Sethi. Prabhat. Okay, they're not here. No issues. Dr. Amrita Bhattacharya.
Yes, can I start or begin
Uh,
if I am audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible. So, Dr.
Okay,
Amrita Bhattacharya is an assistant professor from Vidyasagar Mahavidyalaya, and her abstract is titled Othering and Violence in Spaces and on Bodies, a study of the depiction of widows in the selected short stories of Ashapurna Devi. So, ma'am, please go right
okay,
ahead.
okay. Thank you, ma'am, and the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I am going to present my paper now, which is titled Othering and Violence in
Good
Spaces and on Bodies, a study of the depiction of widows in selected short
afternoon,
stories of Ashapurna
all.
Devi. I am going directly to the full my paper.
Uh,
Widows have traditionally been placed
the
at the bottom of the
topic
hierarchy.
of my
Actually, I think Shomalu is also speaking at the same time.
presentation is
Shomalu, sir.
Actually, he is also reading his paper.
from
So,
Tradition
there seems to
Center
be
and
some issue.
reimagining othering. Okay, okay, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. So
Should I
can you
Okay, okay.
continue?
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
uh,
Sure, ma'am. Sure, ma'am. Okay, okay, sir. No, no issue, ma'am. I will present at the last time. No issue.
okay, okay, thank you.
I think
So
Dr.
Dr.
Samanya is on
Amrita, please
phone
continue.
and
I'm
there's
terribly
Okay,
that
sorry for
voice
the
echo.
interruption.
okay, I'm continuing. Okay, fine. Widows have traditionally been placed at the bottom of the hierarchy in Indian families. For example, they were barred from attending and directly participating in customs like marriage ceremonies or even attending other auspicious occasions. India has a stigmatized black history of burning widows alive, as in sati custom, which was eventually banned by the Britishers. While Indian men were colonially subjugated and Indian women occupied a doubly subjugated position because they were oppressed by both the white masters, Britishers, and men of their own society. Therefore, among these women, the widows occupy such a traumatized existence that they may be compared to that of the black American women suffering under triple burden. They were oppressed simultaneously by the white colonizers as well as their own family members, especially men. This oppression more than often amounts to physical, psychological, and also sexual types. The atrocities directed to their bodies raise several questions. The widows were at first denied all the traces or marks of femininity by forcibly shaving their heads and then by forcing them to wear white garbs. Their attire symbolized that they have discarded all the bodily pleasures or pleasures of the flesh so that they can reinstate themselves to a union with the divine. But this history of oppression and subjugation tells a different story altogether. The presence of the widows is not only banned from all the sacred customs, but their existence itself is not acknowledged by the family. The widows occupy a negative space or a space of void in the Bengali Hindu family. It is this contested space which needs to be discussed. Therefore, the mass exodus of widows from their families to Varanasi recounts a tale of torture, deprivation, neglect, and exploitation. While the widows are instructed that their bodies are not important, in reality, their bodies do matter. They are to satisfy the carnal desires of other male members of the family or the class of the hypocritical priests. Thus, the historical documents, literary or cinematic representations of the widows depict such ambivalent situations. Also, they occupy the third space or the non space position. By third space, we mean Edward Sawyer's radical space of oppression and consequent revolt. This paper will specially focus on the depiction of widows in the short stories of Ashapurna Devi. This paper will also try to question the parameters, stereotypes, deviations, and rebellions achieved, if any, in the literary representation. Here I am going to take just one example from the short story Addiction. In the short story Addiction, which was translated from the original Bengali Nesha, each of the characters are addicted in their own way. Shanta, the widow of the family, is addicted to knitting. The others are addicted to adda or social chatting. The story starts with an allusion to this adda. The story starts with an attack on the faulty world with eyes and ears watching over other people's affairs. These eyes and ears are, in fact, that of the widowed aunt of the family, Shanta. From the beginning of the story, we hear a lot of allegations and infamies about Shanta. The narrator portrays the viewpoint of Partho, who was more than a friend to Krishna, the daughter of the family. Shanta, the widow, makes her physical presence felt throughout the conversations of the other members, even though she never utters a single word. She is even denied her material entity by being compared to the statue of Buddha. Such non presence makes her presence all the more powerful because she becomes the presumed enemy of the growing bond of Partho and Krishna. Krishna senses that Partho is not welcome into the house, and Partho blatantly says, I am sure it's your pea she's doing. Both of them are baffled that her failing eyesight has become so sharp. Um, th- um, Throughout the story, there has been an attempt at obliteration of Shanta's material identity as a widow. She has been called a statue and compared to both god and animal and considered ethereal. But there has always been a reference towards her body, if we can take it as an existence through several similes. Um, I have studied other short stories, but I will go directly to my conclusion. In the above mentioned short stories, we find that the widows are often discriminated by the other members of the society who are biased in their treatment towards them. Thus, the widows occupy mostly a negative space. Widows like Shanta, Giribala, or Suhash are often denied the basic human identity. The concept of space can be critically dealt with in these narratives. By space, I do not mean only the static, immobile contours of geographical domestic space, but also the dynamic and progressive historical space which wanted the widows to relocate to religious spaces like Vrindavan. Historical space imbibes images which help us conceptualize spaces in history. The geographical space implies movement in the formation or creation of the widows' life stories. Whatever I mean by space will remain incomplete if I do not acknowledge the theory of space as laid by Edward Soya. Uh, Soya also shows that even the space of marginality is a coveted position. In the texts under consideration, in spite of occupying a socially marginalized position or spaces, the widows convert their status to highly powerful characters. The first thing that catches our attention is the hierarchization and discrimination present not only on the social or historical but also in the geographical space evident in the houses occupied by the widows and the other family members. This discrimination is also present in the imaginary space occupied by cultural anxieties and fears of the family members and society. In this way, I conclude my paper. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a wonderful paper, and thank you again for keeping it very brief. So, if we have any questions, we'll redirect them at the end of the session, if that's all right with ma'am.
Yes, okay, absolutely.
So, so Farah Subla is not here, unfortunately. So, next we move on to Rashmi Jain. Rashmi Jain, not here. Okay, no issues. How Shushma Devi and Longjam Vedana. Longjam ma'am is here, and I think Haubam ma'am is also here.
Yes, ma'am, we are here.
Okay, so they are both assistant professors at Mani College, and their abstract is titled Reconfiguring the Subaltern Memory, Gender, and Resistance in Binodini's Royal Narrative. So, please, ma'am, go ahead. The floor is all yours.
Okay, let me introduce myself. I'm Habum Shushma Devi, research scholar at Dhanamanjuri University and assistant professor at NG Mani College, Imphal, Manipur, and the co-author Dr. Longjam Betna, assistant professor, Dhanamanjuri University, is my research guide. And today I'm going to present the paper Reconfiguring the Subaltern, Memory, Gender, and Resistance in Binodini's Royal Narrative. So first of all, we need to know who Binodini is. So Binodini was born in the year 1922 and she expired in 2011. And she was born in Manipur as a princess to Maharaj Churachan and Maharani Dhanamanjuri. She was the fifth daughter of this king and queen. Let us come directly to the contributions of M.K. Binodini in Manipuri literature. We have numerous works, but I have taken up some few works that are very notable in Manipuri literature, like Nungairakta Chandramukhi. Hello, am I audible? Hello.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, let me continue then. Boro Saheb Ongi Sana Tombi, published in 1976, Asangba Nongjabi, and 15 other radio plays. Maharaj Churachandgi Imu, 2008, various screenplays and songs, essays on various topics including ecology and environment, and also travelogue, O Mexico Lamkoiwari in 2004. She was also the recipient of Sahitya Academy Award in 1979 for her work Boro Saheb Ongbi Sana Tombi, which is The Princess and the Political Agent, translated by her own son L. Somi Roy. And we also have Jamini Sundar Guha Gold Medal in 1965 for Nungairakta Chandramukhi, translated as Chrysanthemum Amongst Stones. And she was also the recipient of Padma Shri in 1976, but she returned this in 2001 as a revolt against the Armed Forces Special Power Act in Manipur. And this is the picture of
Ma'am
MK
Sushma,
Binodini. Yes?
sorry to sorry to interrupt, but your slide is not moving. Can you please look into it? Slide.
Okay. The slide is not being seen.
It's seen, but it's at the
It's
last part
the
of the
last
slide.
slide, ma'am. You have
Last
to move
part.
to the
Okay.
first slide.
Okay. Wait.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. You can see now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, I will continue like this.
Yeah.
So this is the picture of Maharaj Kumari Binodini, and now she has already expired. Coming to the third slide, so focusing on the subaltern perspective of the study, we need to understand the term subaltern, and as posited by Antonio Gramsci in his prison notebooks, he described that subaltern are those section of people who are being oppressed, who are being marginalized, and who exist outside the power structure of the hegemonical world. And so we need to retrieve, we need to understand those struggles, we need to understand their histories, which are often being misrepresented or ignored in the mainstream historical narratives. And according to Ranajit Guha, who mentions that we need to rethink, we need to rewrite the history of South Asia itself. So, as early as 1980s, he started this subaltern studies group to consider the groups of people who are at the bottom of the social hierarchy. And he also emphasized that the role of the subalterns is to up to the extent that they resist colonialism, and we need to retrieve those voices, their actions, and we also need to look into the matter that they were suppressed, they were overlooked, and we need to bring them out in the front line. And Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak had argued in her Can the Subaltern Speak in 1988 that the subaltern actually cannot speak because not because they are silent, but because your voice is being suppressed and misrepresented by the dominant power structures. So the colonial and the post-colonial power not just silence the subalterns like the peasants, lower caste, and colonized groups, but they are also made unintelligible. And the subaltern feminism perspective also explores a gendered subalternity, arguing women face double oppression in the global south, that is subaltern in both gendered and colonial terms. So the hypothesis of the study is that memory, gender, and resistance, they intersect together to bring out the subaltern voices in the writings of Binodini. And the primary data that I have taken up is the Maharaja's Household, a daughter's memories of her father, published in 2015 and translated by L. Somi Roy, the son of M.K. Binodini. The methodology that I have put up in this paper is the critical analysis of the primary data using theoretical perspective, such as memory theory, gender theory, and resistance theory. So, looking into all this, it necessitates that we need to reassess and reproduce the concept of subalternity as opposed to the earlier definitions of subalterns as voiceless or that they cannot speak by Gayatri Spivak. So how Binodini writes is that she writes by remembering and recollecting oral accounts and experiences of her own to write this royal memoir, that is the Maharaja's household. So I quote what she had written down in the introduction of the work itself. I do not know how to write except from what I hear, from what I experience. I write from what I encounter in life, from what I hear around me, unquote. And she had also mentioned about her father, that is Maharaj Churachan, that she writes not from her memory about her father, not as a king, but as a man of the family, which were often not recorded in royal chronicles. And so she writes from a daughter's perspective. Coming to the next slide, I would like to say that Binodini also counter narrates to bring about the resistance and voices of the many women and the gender that were marginalized to show that they have their own history. Example, Mother Tampak of M.K. Binodini. So Mother Tampak is actually not the birth mother of Binodini, but she was one of the queens of her father, that is Maharaj Churajan. And she was kept at the periphery in the royal household because she could not produce an offspring. And the next example that I had taken up is Maharani Dhanamanjuri. So she was the birth mother of Binodini. She was the Maharani, she was the queen, man queen of Maharaj Churajan. Churajan often confided secrets and discussed any kind of political matter or any household matter to her. And he used to take Dhanamanjuri outside the state to visit other places along with him because she was the man queen. But the only defect that Dhanamanjuri had was she could not bear a son, and so she was also kept at the periphery when the right to the throne were discussed. So these examples of the few women that were often considered to be yielding more power and authority as they were royals are not actually, say, women who have some kind of say in the political matter or in the household, because they were either childless or they either could not bear any son. So this is one of the example, and the historical records and representation had also left out their space and discourse. And I would like to bring the example of one man called Landriba. Landriba actually means not guilty. Okay, so this man Landriba was one of those person who were caught during the Anglo-Manipuri War, and he, in order to survive, he mimicked the ways of the Britishers. He mimicked the ways how this Englishman behave, and he became a kind of man who used to run errands for the Britishers as well as for the royals who were being outcast. And the third point is Binodini's writing itself is her resistance to the gendered historical narratives which have left out the discourse of women and common folks, wherein she again brings out the resistance of these common people and women. And she also wrote about one Mrs. E.M. Jolly, one Mr. Jaffrey, one Mr. Jimshan, who was the last political agent of Manipur. So actually writing about this English people is a kind of counter narration against the writings by the Englishmen about the Manipuris. So when the Englishmen wrote about Manipur, about there are so many books that they have written about Manipur, like the Mites of T. Hudson. But they have left out these small details like this Mr. Landriba, Mother Tampak, and all that. So by writing about these English people who resided in Manipur at that point of time, she is actually counter narrating the against the Britishers. Okay, coming to the conclusion, I would like to mention that by employing memory, gender, and resistance, Binodini had very beautifully crafted out the memoir to reinvestigate and reproduce the aspects of self-alternity in the Maharaja's household, the daughter's memories of her father, the subjugation of the commons and the royals, and their representation by the authority figure, that is the Britishers, is being subverted by Binodini through her writings. And these are the works that I've used. And lastly, thank you everyone for patiently listening to my presentation. And I hope you have enjoyed this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Hava ma'am. That was a wonderful paper. I do have a question. I'll save it for later. So,
Yes.
if you're moving on to the next person, Binoy Bhushan Agarwal, you're here, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, you're here. So, Binoy sir is a research scholar at Amity University, Uttar Pradesh, and his abstract is titled "A Tempestuous Sea on the Mute Woman: Violence and Erasure Within Domestic Spaces in Shashi Deshpande's The Intrusion." So, sir, the floor is all yours.
Yeah. Hi, thank you so much. First of all, my very sincere thanks to the organizers of this international seminar for giving me the opportunity. And here I move on to the paper. So, my paper is titled A Tempestuous Sea and the Mute Woman, Violence and Erasure within Domestic Spaces in Sashi Deshpande's The Intrusion, which is a short story by Deshpande. And I'm borrowing in fact, I've structured, borrowed these metaphors, sea and woman from of course, the text itself. Uh, so, in South Asian tradition, the figure of the wife, okay,
Just a second, sir. Hava ma'am, could you mute your microphone, please? Hava ma'am, could you mute your microphone, please? Sir, go on, please.
so in South Asian tradition, the figure of the wife within domestic confines has often been portrayed as the moral and emotional anchor of the family. However, Indian women writers such as Sashi Deshpande challenge this archetype by foregrounding the psychological and physical violence that pervades ostensibly safe domestic environments. Her short story, The Intrusion, is emblematic of this intervention. Through a minimalist yet powerful narrative, Deshpande constructs a deeply unsettling portrayal of marital rape and emotional estrangement, drawing attention to the silent suffering of women within the walls of their supposed sanctuary. And the reason why I picked up, this text, which was written a couple of decades ago, is precisely because in so many ways, despite the despite the passing of several decades, the story, so with its focus on marital rape, still holds true. And we have, in fact, the Supreme Court thinking about, pondering over it, and of course not criminalizing it as of now, but it really helps us to think of ways in which how certain literature kind of tells us powerful truths and exposes among all things the entire notion of family as safe spaces and so on and so forth. So with that background, the theoretical framework that informs my methodology are primarily drawn from these three theorists. Each situated within a feminist literary criticism and draws heavily on concepts of consent, silence, and domesticity, wherein I borrow from the work of Judith Thurman's Trauma and Recovery, published in 1992, where Herman provides a framework to understand the psychological erasure of women who experience violence within intimate relationships, especially when such violence is normalized by cultural norms. The other theorist whose work informs my work is Catherine McKinnon's theory of sexual coercion and marital rape, particularly her argument that consent in patriarchal institutions, families, is often manufactured rather than freely given, and which is crucial in examining the sexual politics in the text in focus. And the third, theorist that I use in order to understand this particular text is Veena Das, whose notion of everyday violence and the descent of the social into the intimate aids in unpacking how domesticity can serve as a site of sustained and often invisible violence. So together, what these writers, theorists help us do is that they help us think of ways in which silencing, layers of silencing sort of happens at the hands of power, or the power that operates, especially as it is mediated through this narrative. So in talking about methodology, yeah. So, talking about methodology, what I'm doing here is using a close reading approach informed by the feminist narratology to analyze the story's language, image, and structure. Attention is paid to the narrative silence, spatial metaphors, and symbolic motifs such as the sea. The methodology also involves contextualizing the story within the broader discourse of marital rape and social legal invisibility of such violence in India, particularly in the pre and post 1990s feminist movement. Coming to the story, so the first part I have tentatively structured into three broader sections. In the first, I call the silent voice. When what we have is that the protagonist of the intrusion, which is a unnamed, newly married woman, which is a literary choice that strips her of individuality, suggesting the universality of experience. Her silence throughout the story, especially in response to her husband's sexual advances, is crucial. So much of the story is actually told to us in form of interiority, in form of her thoughts, rather than conversation. They're very brief conversation snippets, and that which is only sort of talking about the resistance and sort of putting the husband's moves at abeyance. Her husband interprets her passivity as consent, reflecting the deep-rooted belief in many patriarchal cultures that marriage automatically legitimizes sexual access, and something that we know that Bollywood cinema has sort of romanticized, glorified the idea of stalking, has glorified the idea of women's silence as consent, and that again transcends into within marital structures as well. So there's one a quote which I cite here, which is from the book, and I quote: "He had come to her bed that night without asking, without speaking." Unquote. So this powerful, very short, a sentence that she says is very, very emblematic, very, very powerful, because this sentence, stark in stripped to sentiment, since the woman's silencing, her voice is neither heard nor considered necessary in marital transaction. Deshpande's narrative minimalism becomes a technique of amplification. The way lack of overt violence makes the act more insidious. The protagonist's trauma is internalized rather than expressed, indicating what Herman calls, I quote, disavowed trauma, where the victim cannot articulate pain because the cultural vocabulary to describe it is missing. And when we read the story, in fact, there is a moment of confusion, where she begins to question herself. Why am I doing this wrong? In fact, but Deshpande is careful enough to tell us that this is a woman who is not rejecting marriage per se, she is not rejecting the husband, but what she's looking really for is the idea of creation of a space, creation of intimacy before taking the final plunge, because physical intimacy is something that involves crossing of a border, and which necessarily, at least according to the woman in the text, implies a pre-familiarity, and again the question of consent. Then moving on to the second part, which I've titled as "Home as Coercive Space." Uh, we look at how Deshpande dismantles the cultural fantasy of home as a protective space. Instead, it becomes a claustrophobic realm of patriarchal control. Now, interestingly, what we see here in terms of the setting of the story is actually set in a hotel, because these are the newlywed couple is on a honeymoon, right? And yet, the home is never far, because by virtue of it being a marital space, it being a marriage, it carries with it a sense of home. But nonetheless, by home, I mean also this sense of home where she's coming from. So it is the narrative is constantly punctuated by her memories of home and how this happened, and expectations of it, and so on and so forth. The woman's discomfort with her husband's physical proximity, her reluctance to share her bed, and her emotional withdrawal all signal her alienation from the space. The room was too small, or perhaps the air was. Here, spatial metaphor functions to become, evoke the suffocation of being reduced to a role, a wife rather than a person. This aligns with Veena Das's theory that violence does not always erupt in spectacular forms, but is often sedimented and manifested in the routine and the ordinary. Moving towards the third section, which is where I analyze the symbolic, motive of the sea, right, and which becomes a kind of counter to the silencing of the woman. So what we have is the sea as a trope of rebellion and release. The image of the sea appears briefly but forcefully, symbolizing the protagonist's inner turbulence and longing for liberation. And we are told, and I quote, "She watched the sea endlessly moving, rising, falling, yet never free." End quote. This poetic description captures the rhythm of the woman's suppressed emotions, rising silent rebellion but falling back to resignation. The sea becomes a mirror to her body, fluid, violated, and yearning for agency. And in fact, the sea constantly actually appears, which beginning with the mirroring her desire to go and be with the sea, and towards the end, a certain kind of disgust, certain sense of disenchantment with the sea, which is quite contrary to what we see her, the ways in which she's actually viewing the sea. So the sea's presence serves as a dual role. It is a horizon of possibility and a reflection of protagonist's trapped state. Her gaze at the sea is the only moment of potential subjectivity in the story, suggesting that while she may be silenced, she is not entirely erased. Uh, Now, in terms of why the text becomes important, why literature becomes important, is precisely when you also connect it to the real world, to the political, that is, and which is where I bring it the Indian legal framework, which is where we discuss marital consent and cultural silencing. So, Indian legal frameworks still do not criminalize marital rape, reflecting the societal reluctance to acknowledge coercion within marriage. Deshpande's story, written in a time when such issues were rarely discussed, is thus politically significant. It problematizes the notion of marriage as a symbol of unconditional intimacy, revealing itself instead the which is again a counter to that in Europe was England was danger of the house. The protagonist's silence is not mere compliance, but a form of protest that cannot yet articulate itself, a condition that Mackinnon identifies as what she calls coerced passivity. With that, conclusively, then, we can say that Deshpande's The Intrusion is a compelling critique of patriarchal domesticity and the violence it conceals. Through spare prose and evocative metaphors, the story reveals the deep fractures within the institution of marriage. The protagonist's voicelessness is not emptiness, but an The story thus performs a quiet revolution. It forces us to listen to what is not said, to see what is not shown, to feel the weight of silences that marks women's lives. In this way, Deshpande offers not only a literary narrative, but a feminist intervention that challenges cultural and legal complacency towards domestic and marital violence. With that, I come to the end of it, and thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. That was a wonderful paper, particularly how you connected it to the Indian Penal Code and the lacking laws in it. Wonderful paper, sir. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
So the next person is Tuhin Mojumdar. I don't think Tuhin is here. Tuhin sir is here. Okay, no problem. Shailja Bahadur isn't here either. Okay. Shubhankar Jana.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. So Shubhankar Jana is an assistant professor in the University of North Bengal, and sir's abstract is titled The Uncanny Return, Repressed Memories and the Haunting Past in Gitanjali Sri's Tomb of Sand. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you, ma'am, and the organizers who have invited me and given me this opportunity to present my paper. Ma'am, I would like to share my PPT.
Yes, sir, you
Uh,
can share. All of the participants have been made presenters, sir.
okay, okay. So, in my laptop, I am.
Sir, at the bottom there is share screen option. Yeah.
Uh, is the screen visible, ma'am?
No, sir, the screen isn't visible yet. It is visible now. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. My paper. Is it now perfectly visible, ma'am?
Yes, sir, perfectly visible.
Okay, okay, thank you. I am Mr. Shubhankar Jana, Assistant Professor in the Department of English, Dhupguri Girls College, Jalpaiguri. So the title of my paper is The Uncanny Return, Repressed Memories and the Haunting Past in Gitanjali Sri's famous novel and Booker winner novel, that is The Tom of Shant. Actually, it was a Hindi novel, and Gitanjali Sri was the first Hindi writer to win this International Booker Prize in 2022. And her original publication or original Hindi title was Red Samadhi, which was originally published in Hindi in 2018. Later on, it was translated by an English writer, Daisy Rockwell, and she translated the book into English in uh, 2021 as The Tom of Sand. Finally, it received or both received the International Booker Prize in 2022. And for the better understanding of my title, I have taken it from Freud's famous essay, The Uncanny Return. So, in that essay, Freud gives a definition of what is uncanny. Uncanny is not something unfamiliar, but the familiar which is kept hidden or repressed. So, repressed is also used in the title of my paper. So, this study examines the novel through the lens of trauma theory. And I have taken a famous trauma theorist, Judith Herman, and her famous book, Trauma and Recovery. So the protagonist in this novel, Red Samadhi or the Tom of Shant, her journey reflects the stages of trauma response. First, initial denial, confrontation, and eventual integration of traumatic memories. And I have also taken another famous trauma theorist, Kathy Karuth, who asserts that the victim or the traumatized carry an impossible history within them. So, this novel portrays how unprocessed trauma resurfaces, demanding acknowledgement and resolution. This novel also portrays the enduring impact of repressed memories. It also emphasizes the transformative power of confronting and articulating trauma, leading to personal and communal healing. And in my next slide, I am trying to analyze how trauma theory is used in this particular novel, Tom of Shand. Trauma being a terrifying offshoot of memory.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt. Your slides are not moving.
Oh, let me try again, sir. Is it now moving, ma'am?
No, sir. So even
Oh,
if the slideshow option is not working, you can just move the cursor down and click on the slides. That will work just fine.
now, ma'am?
You can see the slide, but the slides aren't moving, sir.
Slides are not moving?
No, sir.
Oh,
You can just like click down and see if the slides are moving. Just click on one slide after the other instead of doing a slideshow.
I'm just clicking. But
Is it now moving?
No, sir, it's not moving. So, nonetheless, it's okay. So, we can continue without the slides. So, we are running short of time.
Okay then. So sorry.
No, it's okay. I understand. Technical errors
I have
happens.
practiced it a lot so that, okay, ma'am.
I understand, sir.
So in this paper, I have shown that how repressed memories haunted the protagonist, that is Ma in the story, who is nearing 80, and her travel to Pakistan brings her many memories which were actually haunting throughout her life, and this trauma, distress, and agony uh, that millions of people endured during the Indo-Pak partition. It is very nicely voiced in the text by Gitanjali Sri. And I have used a particular theoretical framework, uh, Judith Herman's trauma and recovery theory. This theory actually delineates the stages of trauma response, uh, and the three stages of traumatic responses are like first denial stage, then confrontation, and finally integration. And I have taken uh, three research questions here. How does Tom Upson depict the resurgence of repressed memories in the context of partisan trauma? In what ways does the novel's narrative structure reflect the psychological process outlined in trauma theory? And how do the interactions between the protagonist and other characters facilitate the articulation and processing of traumatic experiences? Uh, In the Tomb of Shant, the protagonist, referred to as Ma, initially exhibits signs of withdrawal and detachment, indicative of unprocessed trauma. Her sudden decision to travel to Pakistan, the land of her traumatic past, signifies the resurfacing of repressed memories. This aligns with Judith Herman's assertion that conflict between the will to deny horrible events and the will to proclaim them aloud is the central dialectic of psychological trauma. Ma's journey embodies this dialectic as she confronts the memories she had long suppressed. So, the novel's nonlinear narrative, characterized by shifts in time and perspective, mirrors the disoriented consciousness of a trauma survivor. Kathy Karuth notes that the traumatized carry an impossible history within them. The fragmented storytelling in Tom of Shand reflects this impossibility as the protagonist's past and present intertwine, blurring the boundaries between memory and reality. So let me now discuss the three stages of trauma recovery in this present context of the novel Tom of Shand. Gitanjali Sri's Tom of Shand presents a profound exploration of trauma and recovery through the journey of its octogenarian protagonist, that is Ma, whose age is nearing 80. Having endured the horrors of the partition of India, Ma's life is marked by suppressed memories and unresolved grief. Judith Herman's three-stage model of trauma recovery, comprising safety and stabilization, remembrance and mourning, and reconnection and integration, provides a valuable framework to analyze Ma's transformative journey. And in the first stage, Harman argues that establishing safety is the foundational step in trauma recovery. For Ma, this stage is initiated following the death of her husband, which plunges her into a deep depression. She retreats into herself, exhibiting signs of withdrawal and detachment. This period of introspection allows Ma to create a psychological space where she can begin to confront her past, her family's concern, and attempts to engage her through initially ineffective, eventually contribute to a supportive environment that facilitates her stabilization. In the second stage, this involves confronting and processing traumatic memories. Ma's decision to travel to Pakistan A journey back to the land of her traumatic past symbolizes her willingness to face the suppressed memories of the partition. This pilgrimage is not merely geographical but deeply psychological, as she revisits the sites of her youth and the trauma she endured. Through interactions with people from her past and reflections on her experiences, Ma begins to mourn the losses she suffered, including her homeland, identity, and the life she might have led. According to Karuth, trauma victims carry an impossible history within them, or they become themselves the symptom of a history that they cannot entirely possess. This process aligns with Herman's emphasis on the importance of mourning in trauma recovery. So, Ma's journey is marked by moments of profound reflection. For instance, Ma asserts in one part of the story, "My earth is my own," signifying her reclaiming of agency and identity. This declaration reflects Herman's observation that the first principle of recovery is the empowerment of the survivor. She must be the author and arbiter of her own recovery. In the third stage or final stage, the survivors integrate their traumatic experiences into their lives and re-establish connections with others. Ma's journey culminates in a renewed sense of self and purpose. Her interactions with diverse individuals, including a transgender companion, signify her openness to new relationships and perspectives. By embracing her past and its impact on her identity, Ma achieves a sense of wholeness and empowerment. This transformation reflects Herman's assertion that recovery leads to a new self, both different from and enriched by the traumatic experience. So, through the lens of Herman's trauma recovery model, Tom of Sand illustrates the intricate process of healing from deep seated trauma. Ma's journey underscores the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of renewal even after decades of suppressed pain. So, in the conclusion part of my study, a famous critic, Miller and Tao, they suggest that ours appear to be the age of trauma. Whereas trauma has been turned into a repertoire of compelling stories about the enigmas of identity, memory, and selfhood that have saturated Western cultural life. Gitanjali's rich Tom of Sand presents a profound exploration of trauma, memory, and the recovery in the context of the partition of India. Through the protagonist's journey, the novel illustrates the resurgence of repressed memories and the psychological processes involved in confronting and integrating traumatic experience. So, some of my references I would like to share with you, but as the screen is not visible, so thank you once again for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you once again, sir, for a really wonderful paper. That was incredible. And I do have a few questions which I want to ask at the end of this session. So, thank you, sir. Moving on, we come to Shomalo Ghosh. Is Shomalo, sir, here?
Yes, ma'am. I'm
Okay,
here.
right. So,
Yes, ma'am. I'm here.
So Shomalu sir is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science, SR Fatehpuria College, and his abstract is titled "From Periphery to Center and Reimagining Othering in Cinema: A Study of Jai Bhim." So, sir, take it away.
Good afternoon, all. My paper is from Periphery to Center, Reimagining Othering in Cinema, a study of Jai Bhim. So, first of all, I would like to invite the research objective, that is to critically examine how the other has been marginalized by the structural violence and systematic discrimination. Number two, to analyze how cinematic narratives like Jai Bhim can function as a tool of political resistance to make space for the other. Uh, Now coming to the research question, how has the voice of other has been marginalized by the dominant caste-based discourse in India, and in what way does the film employ narrative strategies to expose institutional injustice? Now, Edward Said, in his book Orientalism, has devised the concept of othering. It means a process by which a dominant group defines another group as fundamentally different, alien, or inferior. It informs us about the hegemonic power, particularly colonial, imperial, dominant social class, control cultural production, shape knowledge in ways that marginalize, misrepresent subordinate groups. Now, in the real world, following the literature, education, media, and politics, in each and everything, every sphere, we can see that the space has been redefined in a way that marginalized voice or the voice of the others can be dominated or can be eradicated from discussion. The dominant structure in literature, media, education, political discourse have long marginalized subaltern or non-dominant voices, but still several counter narratives have emerged from within and beyond the structure, and it has made us think that the other can speak and has spoken, and when spaces are created even within the hegemonic system. Now, if we go through the movie of Jaivi, we can see that the irregular tribe represent a clear case of constructed other being humanized, excluded, and criminalized by the state, legal system, and dominant society. The film confronts the structural nature of injustice, showing the police, judiciary, political institution, even social norms are often complicit in maintaining a hierarchy where the oppressed are silenced. Now, Joy Bhim offers a powerful counter narrative that foregrounds the moral and emotional strength of a tribal owner who refused to remain invisible. It is the ceremony who, who exists at the heart of the narrative, not as a mere object, but as an agent of justice. Now, how the movie has created a alternative narrative. It has challenged driving, centered the oppressed voice, particularly of a tribal woman, as a site of resistance, exposes systemic oppression within institutions such as police, judiciary, and local bureaucracy, and it demands accountability from structure that typically remains unchallenged. Now, in the same, the film resists the process of othering by allowing the other not only to be seen but heard, but to emerge as a morally and politically central to the narrative. Now, the joy view aligns with the exception we can see cultural production that refuse to silence the other and instead amplify their voice, often in the language of resistance, dignity, and human rights. So, in the conclusion, we can say the joy way not only interrogates dominant narrative, but also reclaim representational space for the others who have been historically denied a voice and visibility. Thus, this paper reads Jaiji not merely as a cinematic article, but as a political and epistemological
Sir, I think
I
there's a
think.
network issue on your part.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please continue. Please continue. No issues.
Ma'am, I have completed it already. I
Okay.
have completed it already.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, such a nuanced paper. Uh, so we are left with Rashmi Jain.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
So welcome, ma'am. So Rashmi Jain is an assistant professor at Ishwar Sharon Degree College, Prayagraj. Her abstract is titled "Representation of Violence in the Select Plays of Mahesh Dattani." So, ma'am, please take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to the organizers and the chairperson. Ma'am, I would be making an oral presentation. Uh, because of certain health issues of my father, I couldn't prepare a PPT, so I'm really sorry for that. But I'll be making an oral
Absolutely all right.
presentation.
It's no problem at all. Absolutely all right, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Mahesh Dattani, he is an iconic dramatist who portrays the social evils of the society while portraying the injustices, and he also focused on the notion of violence inflicted upon the marginalized section of the society. Dattani's plays like Seven Steps Around the Fire, 30 Days in September, and Where Did I Leave My Purdah exhibits violence. Starting from domestic violence to the theory of trauma, all have been depicted through the plays of Dattani. Seven Steps Around the Fire, it depicts violence, both mental and physical, exerted on the transgender as well as on the women who are considered as the marginalized section of the society. The inhuman treatment meted out to the transgenders clearly highlights their deplorable plight. 30 Days in September brings out the trauma of the sexually abused children. Whereas in Where Did I Leave My Parda, it also talks about the repercussion of the sexual violence and trauma associated with that throughout the life. And basically, it talks about the partition scenario. So, gender based violence involves domestic violence, sexual harassment, sexual violence, and rape, etc. In Seven Steps Around the Fire, we find that how even the educated section of the society, like the chief superintendent of the police, Suresh Rao, he insults and humiliates Anarkali, who is a transgender, a hijra. So authorities count hijras as neither male nor female, and they address them with phrases like "it" and "this thing," and they detain Anarkali to the male section of the jail where she was beaten. Suresh Rao says that beat them thoroughly because they are strong like horses. So their identity has been reduced to animals, or they are not even counted as a human being. So Uma, who was the wife of Suresh Rao, she was pursuing research on hijras. She was an idealist and humanitarian, and she treats them well. She treats the hijras well. However, we find that both are sailing. The Uma as well as Anarkali, who was a hijra, both are sailing in the same boat of marginalization. We find that over here, even the hijra Kamla was murdered because she was in love with minister's son Subbu. And since the privilege of marriage were denied to the hijras, she was brutally murdered. We even found that how the hijras are emotionally traumatized because when Uma takes her out of the jail, she considers her as her sister. But Anarkali was a bit hesitant because she never knew whether she could accept Uma as her sister or not. In the other play, that is the 30 Days in September, we find that it is the saga of incest and betrayal, where we find that I have used the theories that given by Maxwell Maltz and G. Stanley Hall, where we find that in this particular play, we find that violence has been inflicted also. However, we find that Dattani is trying to solve this problem through the theory of psychodramatic therapy in psychoanalysis. So we find that Mal says that sexual abuse is a shameful act when a dominant person does sexual act forcefully. It can be defined as a sexual act between an adult and an immature child, explicitly or in a hidden way. So we find that the victim faces psychological as well physical problems throughout the life, and sexual trauma can be cured by this psychodramatic theory in psychoanalysis. We find that psychoanalyst tries to understand the basic problem of the victim and provides him or her with a secure environment which helps the victim to come back to the real world of normalcy. So, in addition, we also find that childhood molestation affects the victim physically as well as mentally, and they are being influenced by various other trauma or disease problems like depression or anxiety disorder or inferiority complex. So, or various other kinds of problems, which is reflected in the protagonist, that is Maya's character in 30 Days in September. Dr. Temur Kayani, he says, I would just like to quote that Tattani has shown a complete journey of the victim Mala, her uncle, brother of the mother, Vinay, who exploited Mala. This hurtful experience has fixed into her subconsciousness, which leads Mala to a pathetic life. The description is getting over sexual trauma and mental condition that has been analyzed under the psychodramatic theory. Further, this study suggests a way of getting over sexual trauma by using psychodramatic theory, particularly through three stages of recovery, that is, warm up, action, and sharing. We find that another problem which the victim suffers through is guilt, disgrace, self blame, which Mala always does, that she herself is responsible for the heinous crime that has been done to her. She always says that Mala says that I don't know why. I just don't know. I do not understand. Please do not ask me why I do it. It is just a game, not a game. No, it is not. I know it is wrong. What I'm doing is wrong. However, it means a lot to me. So always she blames herself for the crime that has been done to her. She could not understand it that she has been victimized. She has not done anything wrong. So we find that the first stage of warm up is that when Mala's boyfriend Deepak helps her out, he tries to motivate Mala to accept the wrong that has been done to her and to discuss it with him. So he tries to break the mystery of Mala's life. He takes her to the counselor and he tries to understand what is the problem with her. So, this kind of support relationship enhances the trust of the victim and she starts feeling safe. Deepak says that I have met your counselor yesterday, Mala. What did he say? Deepak says that she did not talk to me about you. She said that it is confidential. So this kind of peaceful environment, it gives a kind of assurance to the victim that her secrets are safe and it is not going to be revealed by anyone. We find that this kind of support motivates Mala so that she can talk about the crime that has been done to her because she has been repressing it all the time. She does not want to talk about it, and until and unless it comes out through words, through her voice, she would not be at peace. So this is definitely required, and her boyfriend Deepak, he gives her that support, and we find that the resolution of the issues related to the physical and the emotional safety, it tries to be solved by the partner, and at one point of time Mala starts in a way we find that she starts trusting Deepak and she says that she does not want to go her home and she wants to stay over here, and Deepak supports her and he says that okay, you don't have to go anywhere, you can stay here and I will fetch you a blanket. So we find that how he is making her understand the sexual trauma, to come out of that sexual trauma that has been done to her. Finally, she breaks the ice. Mala breaks the ice, and she raises questions to her mother that how Shanta was responsible uh, for the heinous crime that has been done to her, and she considers her mother as a culprit who does not save her life, who could have saved her, and she speaks her inner feeling, which is a kind of a recovery of the victim. And finally, we find that when she talks out her heart to her mother, we find that in the final stage, she comes to know that it is not only she who has been um, um, uh, molested by her uncle, her mother was also being tortured by her own father. So both comes to a mutual understanding. In the third play, that in Where Did I Leave My Parda, we find that it is the story of Nazia, who has been during the partition scenario, she has been raped, and she's suffering from the trauma of rape. And we find that over here the communal violence has also been talked about by the Tani, where he says that there was a train which was full of Hindus, and the writers wanted to kill everyone on the train, and except the Muslims. So the woman advised her to wear a burqa. However, Nazia utters that, "Where did I leave mine?" Her friend Zareen puts her burqa in Nazia's trunk and she asks her to wear it. Nazia wears Zareen's burqa, and we find that finally Nazia was saved and Zareen sacrifices her life for her friend Nazia. We even find that.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have to conclude, ma'am.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Just a minute. So, as there is lack of time, I'll just conclude that violence inflicted on the innocent people results into the repressed experiences, causing various troubles in their life, which can be solved through the theory of psychoanalysis. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much for that paper, ma'am, particularly for talking about trauma studies and psychological interventions that are required in order to further open the gates for that. So, moving on, we are joined by Dr. Tuhin Mojumdar. Sir, you're here.
Yes, ma'am.
So, Dr. Tuhin Mojumdar is an assistant professor at Khatra Adivasi Mahavidyalaya. Sir's abstract is titled Pandemic Screenscapes: Fear, Trauma, Stigmatization, Othering, and Resilience in Virus, Bleed, and Kalapani. Sir, please go ahead.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, sir, you're loud and audible.
Okay. So, the topic of my presentation, pandemic screenscapes of fear, stigmatization, trauma, and resilience. I'm going to deal with it through two films, Virus and Bheer, and a web series, Kala Pani. Epidemic films not only depict biological contagions but also social fragmentation. Unlike natural disasters that may unite people, pandemics often lead to isolation and fear. This theme runs through literature from Boccaccio's The Decameron to Camus' The Plague, and continues in films that explore the breakdown of societal norms and moral order. Epidemic stories, as Julia Echeverria argues, are deeply metaphorical. They do not simply portray disease, they dramatize what Derrida calls the autoimmune state, where a society dismantles its own defense out of fear. These narratives unfold within what Ulrich Beck terms the world risk society, which is marked by constant uncertainty and systematic fragility. In Indian cinema, this plays out with stark local urgency. Ashik Abu's Virus, in 2019 this film came. This is based on Kerala's 2018 Nipah outbreak, and it focuses on communal efforts but also reveals how fear leads to social stigmatization. Early in the film, rumors and conspiracy theories begin spreading faster than the disease itself. Minorities and marginalized groups are falsely labeled as virus carriers, reflecting real life communal targeting. Trauma here is collective but unevenly distributed. Frontline workers, especially women like nurse Lini Puthuseri, bear the brunt of both risk and sacrifice. The film honors them while revealing the psychological toll of working amid death and misfortune. Anubhav Sinha's film Bheer, which is set in 2023 and it is framed during the COVID 19 lockdown, it focuses even more sharply on trauma and stigma. The film opens with a harrowing scene: 16 migrant workers crushed on railway tracks, a powerful metaphor for the systematic neglect they face. At a rural border checkpoint, caste and class hierarchies resurface brutally. Surya, a Dalit police officer, internalizes this oppression while enforcing state authority. His relationship with Renu, an upper caste doctor, is fraught with unspoken social tensions. Here, the trauma of pandemic is not just about infection, it is also about rejection, humiliation, and invisibility. The stranded migrant worker Balaram, the privileged Madam G, and the emphatic journalist Vidhi together represent contrasting layers of suffering and denial. While Madam G assumes immunity by virtue of wealth, Balaram is literally barred from returning home. The black and white cinematography links the Covid migration with the partition of 1947, underscoring the trauma of being displaced in one's own land. Finally, the web series Kalapani, featured in 2023, it expands these themes further. Set in the near future in the Andaman Islands, it imagines an outbreak that turns the island into an isolated prison. The show visualizes trauma not just through death or illness but through moral dilemmas. One father's desperation to save his infected daughter leads him to break quarantine, an act of trauma induced irrationality. Stigmatization is at the core of the web series Kalapani. Indigenous tribes who live in harmony with nature are framed as obstacles to scientific progress. The government's proposal to extract life-saving peptides from the cerebral fluid mirrors historical exploitation and biocolonialism. Trauma here becomes ecological, cultural, and existential. The series asks who gets saved and at what cost. Across these three screenscapes, Virus, Bheer, and Kalapani, we witness how fear distorts empathy. Social divisions harden. The infected are isolated, the poor are marginalized and blamed. Yet, in the midst of all this, these narratives also spotlight resilience of healthcare workers, of migrants, of indigenous resistance. Camus' The Plague reminds us that epidemics do not end, they sleep only to return. In pandemic cinema, what persists is just the pathogen, but the psychological scars left behind. Yet these films also insist, like Camus, I quote, there are more things to admire in men than to despise. Through fear and stigma, what ultimately emerges is the possibility of collective endurance. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that absolutely wonderful paper, sir. That was fascinating, and I would not personally have ever thought of connecting Kalapani with Camus, sir. So that was a brilliant paper. Thank you so much for that, sir.
Thank you.
So now that we are done with the presentations, the floor is open to questions. So anyone has any question to any of the presenters, please feel free to ask them. If not, then I will go ahead with some of my questions. Okay, so the first question is obviously to Dr. Tuhin. So we talked about Kalapani and the plague and everything. So and one thing you said was struck me was how epidemics, they never die, they sleep. So for the last 15-20 years, I've seen this consistent putting out of epidemic cinemas about virus outbreaks, zombie outbreaks, and the first thing that we see in these films or these narratives is the breakdown of humanity. So why do you think that this is the narrative that has come up again and again and again in the same form for the last 20 or so years, like if from 28 weeks later to films even before that? Why do you think the structure remains the same? Is it because we haven't changed? And even during COVID's pandemic, we also saw a very breakdown of humanity to a certain extent.
Thank you, ma'am, for the question and the observation also. If we look into literatures like Boccaccio's The Decameron, or maybe Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year, or let's say plague itself. See, it's not that this duality in human behavior, that fear can strip away social bonds, okay, but the duality is also that it can also galvanize people to act selflessly. Particularly in reference to the plague, there was a reference to the sanitary squads. Let's take example of the red volunteers during the COVID-19. This enables our towns to come to grips with the disease, and they almost sacrifice their lives like the frontline workers. So it not just strip away social bonds, they also galvanize people. And particularly, I would refer here to Professor Harish Trividi's appeal of solidarity through literature. He says that, in literature, it regards each individual with compassion. It may not fight off things such as pandemics, even modern science cannot do so, but it does become a source of consolation and a way of sharing our common humanist concerns. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So is Rashmi ma'am present here? I had a question for her. Oh, I think she has left. No problem. So is Shomaldo sir here? I think he has left as well. Okay. So Binoy sir?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so sir, that was a wonderful paper, and I have one observation and one question. So one observation is that Deshpande's text, as you mentioned, is not located inside a home, which is traditionally associated with the feminine sphere. Instead, it's located in a hotel. So it reminds me of this text by Ian McEwan on Chesil Beach, where the female protagonist, she's thrust into a marriage. She's without without any understanding of what it means to be a wife. So that's the observation part. And the
Thank you.
question is, so we talk about writing or talking as resistance, as speaking out of trauma. So my question is, and I have asked this to other participants as well, can silence be ever a form of resistance, or do you think silence is something that will always be associated with a wound, with an injury?
Yeah, very thought-provoking question actually, because we very often use silence as resistance. But yeah, my response to that would be because I think silence can be a form of resistance, because very often, when words don't make meaning in the sense of how you aren't being heard, how you aren't being heard. When actions perhaps are limited in terms of action, I can't do much. There's a silence also implies a certain sense of withdrawal, a refusal to perform, which is where another text by American writer. It's very I mean, it's on my mind, but it's not coming here right now at the moment. Again, it talks about this refusal of this man to the Bartleby. Bartleby is the scrivener, which is, yeah. So which is precisely what he's doing. He refuses to work, and initially we introduced to him as somebody who's assiduously working, and so on and so forth. So silence withdraw is a form of withdrawal, and therefore it is also can be a very strong form of refusal. And I think it has to be consistent. It has to have a certain magnitude, right? In the sense that for it to be noticed, I think silence also operates in a framework, in a space, in a field where it can, or perhaps it has to be amplified to the extent. Despite, and it's that I'm talking about the word amplification, but the silence also has to be right? But it pushes people, the other, out of its comfort zone. And I think it is the refusal to perform, and in that sense, silence and all that it connotes, will make meaning, will be a form, is a form of active resistance. But for that resistance to be effective, it also has to be noticed. So I think there is that level threshold that one needs to reach when one is talking about silence, and how one makes concerted attempts to be also noticed. And I think it will be noticed, especially in a very small setting like the one that we have here in the text that I took. It is clearly because when somebody is expecting you, you're also under gaze. So I think the silence, the refusal will be noticed, and therefore within that framework, silence is and will always be a very strong form of resistance. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, it's definitely does, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
So I have a question for Shubhankar sir, and it's also a little related to what Binoy sir has talked about. We talk about trauma, right? So trauma. So there's been a sort of conflict between, for instance, in a minority group. If I am part of a minority group, what should be privileged? Should my subjective traumatic narrative, should it be presented, or should the collective narrative of the entire minority should be presented? So this is something I struggle with, and this is something like I want to know your opinion, sir. So both Shubhankar sir and Binoy sir. And of course, this question goes out to Hauwa ma'am as well, because she consistently talked about trauma narratives.
I think while others are probably thinking,
Yes.
maybe I think individual stories matter. When you're talking about collective, there is a way, I think, of framing collective resistance, collective struggles. But I think the collective always becomes much more meaningful, much more resonant when we bring in personal, elements, personal narratives, because it also complicates, nuances a picture, ways in which each one of us, let's say, imagine that we're part of a collective minority or whatever it is that we are collectively, resisting. So I think each one of us have our own experiences, which can be diverse and yet fall within the same category of struggle that we're talking about. So I think it is the personalized or the personal, the individual struggles, the individual stories become equally meaningful in the production of a larger collective narrative.
Okay, sir. Okay, that's wonderful, sir. Thank you for such a nuanced take. So, if anyone else does not have any questions, then we will conclude this session for today. Okay, so I assume no one has questions. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being present, for your patient listening, and for your wonderful abstracts. And of course, you all are welcome to join tomorrow's session, which starts at 9:30. We will be joined by eminent speakers like Dr. Chandrani Bishash, and we will also have a panel. I will be hosting that, which is again, we'll talk about othering and violence, particularly in the field of sexual violence. So do please do join. And again, thank you so much, and good evening, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Goodbye.